They said, "She won't even notice. Just use her name. She's too old to understand." They laughed behind my back, but I was listening, and I was documenting everything. Now, they'll never laugh like that again. My name is Elaine Morgan. I'm 66 years old, and for most of my life, I've believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt, especially the ones you call family. I've lived in the same red brick house for over 3 decades. It's not grand, but it's solid, built with my late husband, Mark. He laid the stone path in the backyard himself, always said he preferred dirt under his nails to a pen in his hand. He passed away 8 years ago, peacefully, thank God. And since then, it's just been me, the house, my garden, and a schedule that only I answer to. I bake on Sundays, read paperbacks with cracked spines. I still handwrite checks because I like the feel of pen on paper. Call me old-fashioned. I've been called worse. But I've always found a strange comfort in routines. They make the world feel steady, predictable. Melissa was the unpredictable part. She's my niece, my late sister Judith's only child. I helped raise her after Judith died in that awful wreck. Melissa was only 10. I stepped in because there was no one else. I was already in my 40s by then. Mark and I had no children of our own. We'd tried. The universe had other plans. So when Melissa came to live with us, it felt like something had finally arrived. She called me Auntie Lane, always with this brightness in her voice that melted me. That child could have asked for the moon, and I would have tried to stitch it into a quilt. Years passed. Melissa grew up into this sharp, ambitious woman. Married a man named Greg. Clean-cut, confident, talked a little too much, but always smiled at the right times. They weren't rich, but they lived well enough. Visited on holidays, sent me flowers on my birthday, called when they needed a recipe or a bit of advice. I never asked for anything from them. I didn't need to. Being remembered was enough. Then, a few months ago, they came over on a Thursday afternoon, unannounced, but with arms full of groceries and voices a little too cheerful. "We thought we'd cook for you, Auntie," Melissa said, kissing my cheek. "You always do so much for us." Greg followed behind her, juggling a bottle of wine and a paper bag that reeked of cinnamon rolls. "We wanted to catch you before the weekend." I remember thinking something felt off. Not bad, just rehearsed. We sat at the kitchen table after dinner, the one Mark built with his own hands. Melissa reached across it and took mine gently. "Auntie," she said, "we're in a bit of a situation." She explained how Greg's tech startup folded, how rent was piling up, credit cards maxed. They just needed a small loan to help them stay afloat. Nothing big, just a cushion. They'd pay it back within the year. Greg chimed, In. "You've always been the rock in this family. We don't trust anyone else like we trust you." I didn't answer right away. My gut, always so quiet, whispered something I couldn't quite hear. But Melissa looked so tired, so sincere, and she had tears in her eyes when she said, "Please." I told them I'd sleep on it. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of chamomile and Mark's old letters spread out on the table. He used to write to me whenever we argued, never raised his voice, just wrote what he felt. I found one letter, dated 1986, just 4 words at the end. "Trust is your treasure." I looked up at the empty chair across from me. The next morning, I called Melissa and said yes. And that was the beginning. They came over that same afternoon, papers already printed and clipped together in a neat little folder. Melissa wore a soft green sweater, her hair pulled back like she used to wear it in high school. Greg smiled like everything had already been solved. "It's just a formality." he said, placing the folder between us on the table. Your name on the loan helps us get approved. Your credit's amazing. I felt a flush of something. I'm not sure if it was pride or worry. I flipped through the pages slowly. Bank logos, loan terms, blank signature lines. I don't like signing things I don't understand, so I told them I'd take a few hours to read it through. Greg hesitated. Melissa leaned in. Auntie, she said softly, it's time sensitive. We're supposed to meet the loan officer by 5. It's already after 3. That whisper in my gut stirred again. Still, I picked up my reading glasses, scanned the key sections, and asked, what happens if you miss a payment? Greg waved his hand. Won't happen. We're already interviewing. Melissa's freelance work just picked up too. I looked at her, and she nodded. One client's already booked me through the fall. I wanted to believe them. I needed to. So I signed. Melissa squeezed my hand, eyes misty. You've always believed in me, Auntie. I promise we'll make this right. Greg took the documents and tucked them back into the folder with practiced ease. Too practiced. I told myself not to think like that. After they left, I made tea, sat on the porch, and watched the sun lower behind the oak tree Mark planted before he passed. For a while, everything felt quiet again. But quiet doesn't always mean safe. The first odd thing happened 3 weeks later. A letter from a bank I'd never heard of showed up. Elaine Morgan, my name, printed neatly in the corner, along with an unfamiliar account number. At first, I assumed it was a mistake, some kind of mix-up. I called the customer service line and was told, politely but firmly, that my name was on file for a $7,000 line of credit opened just 2 weeks prior. Did you not authorize this? The rep asked. No, I said. I didn't. Are you sure it wasn't a family member using your information with permission? That word, permission, clanged against my ribs. I ended the call, walked straight to my study, and opened a new folder. I labeled it, in pencil, in case I'm right. Over the next week, I added to it a store credit card from a chain I'd never shopped at, a gas bill for an apartment I didn't own. Mail kept arriving in my name, but for debts I hadn't made. I confronted Melissa once, casually. I mentioned the mail. Oh, that. Yeah, Greg might have used your name for a utilities account to help qualify for a lease. It's nothing shady, Auntie. Just temporary. You know how hard it is out there now. She smiled like it was all just paperwork, like I was being dramatic. I wanted to believe her. But late that night, I stood in front of the mirror and told myself something I hadn't admitted in years. They're using you. It hurt more than I could explain. But pain has a strange way of sharpening your senses. So I started watching, listening, waiting. Greg and Melissa kept dropping by, less after I signed those papers. But when they did, they came bearing smiles and excuses. Oh, Auntie, we've just been swamped, Melissa would say, planting a kiss on my cheek like a Band-Aid over a bruise. You know how life gets. I wanted to believe it was life, that they were just busy, but then came the accidents. One afternoon, I found an opened envelope tucked into the bottom of my recycling bin, addressed to me, but listing a payment past due for something called Premier Cash Advance. I never applied for anything like that. Never even heard of it. The following week, I got a voicemail from a collections agency. The man on the other end said my account had missed its first payment. He rattled off an address in another part of town, an apartment complex I didn't live in. I didn't call back. I printed the voicemail transcript, added it to the folder. That same week, Greg texted me, something about a last-minute weekend getaway they were taking just to recharge. Melissa posted a picture of a rooftop dinner on her social media later that night. Champagne, candles, designer shoes. The caption read, "Deserve every bit of this." All paid for, I assumed, with the name she borrowed, with the name I gave. At the grocery store, a cashier asked if I'd opened a new card through their partner bank. "Your name's been popping up," she said cheerfully. I laughed, short, tight. "No, that's a mistake." But it wasn't. They were using my name like it belonged to them, like it was nothing more than a key to doors they hadn't earned. I started checking my credit report daily. Every time I logged in, another alert. One night, while pulling up a PDF statement I hadn't recognized, I found my own signature at the bottom of a loan agreement for $10,000. Only, I never signed it. At least not with that pen. Not on that day. The signature had been copied, forged. It looked like mine, but I knew better. I remembered something Mark once told me when we were applying for our first mortgage. Theft doesn't always come in ski masks. Sometimes it smiles across your table and calls you auntie. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat at my kitchen table with every piece of stolen paper I could find and decided it was time to stop hoping they'd do right. It was time to start preparing for what I already knew was coming. The house was quiet that night. Too quiet. I'd just finished tidying up after dinner, and my hands were still damp from washing the last dish. Melissa and Greg had dropped by earlier to check in and left, like they always did lately, without offering to help or ask if I needed anything. I went upstairs around 10, tucked myself in with a book I wasn't really reading. Around midnight, I realized I'd left my tea mug in the den. The lights were off, and I didn't want to trip on anything, so I moved slow. When I reached the hallway, I paused. The guest bedroom door was slightly open. Their voices filtered out, muffled, but clear enough. "Do you think she suspects anything?" Melissa asked. Greg laughed. "Elaine. She writes checks, for God's sake. She still thinks paper mail is private. She won't even notice." Melissa giggled. "We've maxed out every card in her name, and she still thinks we're paying her back." Then silence, followed by laughter. Real laughter. Greg said, "She won't even notice we used her name for the loan. She trusts us that much." Melissa added, "She's old. By the time it catches up, she won't even remember how it happened." That's when I stopped breathing. I couldn't move. I stood there in the dark like a ghost in my own home. They weren't scared. They weren't sorry. They were smug. And in that moment, something inside me cracked, but not like glass. No, it cracked like dry earth before a storm. A warning, a beginning. I stepped backward slowly, careful not to make a sound. My tea mug remained on the table. My body carried itself up the stairs without feeling real. When I reached my bedroom, I sat on the edge of the bed, folder in hand, heart hollow. Not angry. Not yet. Just empty. Like everything I had believed about loyalty, about love returned, had vanished in the space of 4 cruel sentences. But as the minutes passed, that emptiness began to shape itself into something else. Resolve. They laughed, thinking I wouldn't notice. But they forgot who I used to be before the grief, before the grey hair, before they started calling me weak. They forgot I was watching. And now I was wide awake. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, the soft hum of the radiator my only company, folder in my lap, breath shallow. My tea had gone cold downstairs, forgotten. But I wasn't thinking about tea anymore. I was thinking about how many times I had looked into Melissa's eyes, and believed her. How many holidays I had cooked for them, how many small kindnesses I had given without hesitation, and how they had turned my name, into currency. They weren't just stealing money, they were stealing the trust I had built over a lifetime. I remember looking at the framed photo on the bookshelf. Mark and I, in our 20s, standing in front of the very first bank we ever got approved at. I was holding the keys to our starter home, grinning like a girl who believed the world had goodness in it. And now, my name was being used for luxury handbags and hotel suites. I felt like a fool. And that was the part that hurt the most, because I pride myself on being careful. I taught Melissa to budget, for heaven's sake. I walked her through her first tax return. I drove her to interviews when she didn't have a car. I even bought her wedding dress. And yet, here I was, scammed by the very person who used to fall asleep on my shoulder after bad dreams. I couldn't call the bank that night, but I could prepare. I went into the closet and pulled out my old file cabinet. Mark used to say I kept better records than the IRS. I pulled every financial document I owned: bank statements, copies of my credit report, emails, voicemails, that loan Greg brought over to sign, the fake one. I compared the signature on that paper with my real one. The curve of the E was off, the spacing too perfect. Someone had traced me. I added it all to the folder, labeled it again in permanent ink this time. Proof. By 8 a.m., I was at the bank. I sat down across from a young woman named Holly, who wore large glasses and had kindness in her voice. I explained everything slowly, carefully. She didn't interrupt, just kept nodding and taking notes. When I handed her the folder, she flipped through a few pages, then looked at me. Really looked. "You did everything right, Ms. Morgan," she said. "This is fraud, and you're not alone." That's when the tears came. Not because I was scared, because I had been believed. Holly gave me direct numbers to their fraud unit, helped me lock down my credit, issued a formal dispute, and scheduled a call with their legal team. "Do you know who did this?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said, voice steady. "My niece and her husband." She blinked. "Are you ready to pursue this?" I nodded once. I wasn't just ready. I was certain. That night, I called a lawyer, a woman named Carla, whom I'd met once at a community talk on elder protection. She specialized in financial exploitation cases. When I told her my story, she didn't gasp. She just said, "We'll make this right, quietly, but thoroughly." Carla took the folder and began organizing the case like clockwork. She warned me it wouldn't be quick. There would be hearings, paperwork, maybe pushback. But I didn't flinch. "They think I'm too old to understand what they've done," I told her. "Let's show them how wrong they are." Carla leaned back in her chair. "There's one option," she said slowly. "We could wait. Let them keep digging their own grave, then serve them publicly." I raised an eyebrow. Publicly. "There's a family reunion coming up, right?" I froze. "Yes. Next month. Why?" Carla smiled, just slightly. "Then let's do it there. With witnesses. With clarity. With truth I exhaled for the first time in days. They thought I wouldn't notice. But I had. And I was going to make sure the entire family noticed, too. Carla didn't waste time. Within days, she had gathered everything: bank records, forged loan agreements, voice transcripts from the collections agency, even screenshots of Melissa's shopping sprees tied to my accounts. "They weren't smart," she said, flipping through one file. "They were arrogant." I sat across from her desk in a navy cardigan, clutching the same worn purse I'd carried to every PTA meeting, every funeral, every job interview in my life, and now I was carrying it into battle. Carla contacted the fraud department directly. We opened a full case. Subpoenas were issued for credit applications. She filed identity theft charges on my behalf. I had to sign multiple affidavits, each one with a growing sense of cold finality. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a crime. You understand, once we serve them, things might get loud, Carla said one afternoon, eyeing me closely. Family may take sides. I nodded. They already took something from me. I'm just reclaiming it. She smiled slightly, that lawyer's smile that never quite reaches the eyes. You're stronger than most. I'm just tired of pretending I'm not. We decided to wait. Let the paper trail expand. The more accounts they opened in my name, the deeper the case. The more charges, the more undeniable the fraud. Every week, Melissa texted me with cheerful updates. Thinking of you, Auntie. Greg's interview went well. Can't wait for the reunion. Bought the prettiest dress. Each one twisted the knife. I responded only once. See you soon? Meanwhile, Carla quietly coordinated with the local sheriff's department. Fraud was one thing. Elder financial exploitation? That was another level entirely. They took it seriously. They were just waiting for the green light. Then came the final trigger. A $25,000 business loan taken out in my name with a forged W-2 attached. Carla looked up from the documents and said simply, "Now they've done it." We scheduled the subpoenas to be served at the reunion, not to humiliate for sport, but to ensure they could no longer deny what they did. I didn't tell anyone. I just marked the date on my calendar. May 14th. Family reunion and justice. The sun was too bright that morning. I arrived early, helped set up chairs under the old oak trees in the park near my childhood home. Relatives I hadn't seen in years hugged me tightly. "Elaine, you haven't aged a day. Still making those lemon bars?" I smiled and nodded. I wore a soft blue dress, Mark's wedding ring on a chain around my neck. Carla told me to act natural. Let them come to you. Just before noon, Melissa and Greg arrived. Late, of course. Melissa was wearing something red and bold, lips painted to match. Greg had on sunglasses and a smug smile. They swept in like celebrities, waving to a few cousins, Greg handing out jokes like business cards. When they spotted me, Melissa squealed and hugged me as if nothing had happened. "I've missed you, Auntie." I didn't hug back, just smiled and said, "Let's make this a day to remember." She blinked, thrown off by the calm in my voice. An hour later, as everyone gathered under the main tent, one of my nephews began a toast. People clinked glasses, laughing, stories about childhood and bad casseroles. That's when I stood. I don't know how quiet the world can get until you tap a wine glass with a fork and 40 people freeze mid-breath. I held up a folder. My folder. Proof. My name, I said calmly, has been used over the last 5 months to open 9 credit cards, 2 business loans, and 4 lines of credit, none of which I authorized. A murmur. Heads turned. Melissa shifted in her seat. Greg's hand tightened on his glass. All those accounts, I continued, were opened by the same 2 people I once trusted with my home, my money, and my love. I paused, then turned directly to Melissa and Greg. "You." Gasps broke across the tent like thunder. A plastic fork clattered to the ground. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." "You laughed," I said, louder now. "You joked that I wouldn't even notice, that I was too old, too trusting." My voice didn't shake. If anything, it sounded stronger than I'd heard it in years. "Well," I added, "I noticed. and so did the law. Two plainclothes deputies stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. Melissa's face went white. Greg stood up suddenly. "You can't do this. This is a family event." "It was," I interrupted, "until you made it criminal." The deputies served them both. Formal, legal, no fanfare, just cold reality. Melissa started crying. Greg tried to bluster, but the air was already gone from his lungs. "I raised you," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I gave you everything, and you used me like a stepping stone." Melissa's mascara was running now. "Auntie, please." I turned away. "You don't get to call me that anymore." And I walked off, past the food table, past the cousins frozen in place, past the children still too young to understand betrayal. Behind me, the silence cracked open. But ahead of me, it was finally quiet. I didn't turn back. Not even when Greg started yelling, "This is a mistake! She's confused!" Not even when Melissa sobbed, loud and frantic, like a child caught stealing candy. Not even when the air turned thick with judgment and whispers. Because the truth doesn't need defending once it's visible. Let them scramble. I reached the edge of the tent as a cousin tried to follow me, murmuring, "Elaine, what just happened?" "They stole my name," I said, and laughed about it. That shut her up. Behind me, the scene unraveled. Melissa was trying to shield her face as the deputies handed her the second envelope. Greg shoved his sunglasses back on like armor, but he was shaking. His mother stood with her mouth wide open. One of my uncles demanded answers. "You used Elaine?" he barked. "Are you serious? After everything she's done for you?" I heard another voice cut in, Carla's. She'd arrived quietly after me and had stood back, watching everything unfold. "She has every document, every call, every signature," Carla said, loud enough for the tent to hear. "The court will decide, but we already know the truth." Melissa screamed then. "She's ruining our lives." "No, sweetheart. You did that all on your own." I reached the parking lot as Carla caught up to me. She didn't say much, just opened the car door for me, placed the folder on the passenger seat, and nodded. "It's done," she said. "Not yet," I replied, "but it's started." We sat in the car for a few minutes, while the reunion behind us crumbled like a paper plate under weight it was never meant to carry. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about dignity. They'd taken it piece by piece, smiling through every theft, assuming age made me blind. But I saw it all. And now, so did everyone else. The week that followed moved like molasses. Melissa tried calling, 7 times. Left voicemails that started as apologies and ended in venom. Greg emailed, formally this time, asking if there was a way to resolve this without further embarrassment. Embarrassment? After robbing me of identity, credit, and peace. I didn't reply. Carla told me to say nothing until the arraignment. But silence wasn't empty. It was protection. Then the letters came, from family members who'd once invited me to baby showers and potlucks, cousins I hadn't heard from in years. One wrote, "Elaine, I am so sorry. I had no idea they were using you like that." Another, "You did the right thing. You don't owe them forgiveness." I didn't reply to those either, because I wasn't ready to discuss what it meant to be betrayed by someone who once sat on your lap during bedtime stories. Someone who once called you second mother. Someone you loved more than they ever loved you back. The court issued a freeze on the accounts. My credit was flagged and marked protected. Melissa and Greg were both charged with identity theft and financial abuse of an elder. Their attorney tried to argue it was a misunderstanding within the family. Carla shut that down in 2 words: documented intent. She was ruthless in the best way. Melissa and Greg tried to settle privately. Carla refused. You don't get to damage someone publicly and apologize in private, she said. The hearing was scheduled for late July. By then, they were being evicted from their apartment. The loan they'd taken in my name defaulted. The banks wanted repayment, and they were now coming after them. Good. Let the paper trail chase them now. I sat on my porch one evening, late June, rocking gently, tea in hand. The hydrangeas were blooming. A neighbor passed by and waved. Heard what happened? She said. Good for you. I didn't say anything back. Not because I didn't agree, but because there are no words for that kind of quiet victory. The kind where you don't shout. You just endure. You don't destroy. You expose. You don't raise your fists. You raise the truth and let it burn everything false to the ground. I never sent a reply to Melissa, but I did write a letter. Not to her, not to Greg, not to the court, to the women who sit in their kitchens with hands folded around lukewarm tea, to the ones who lie awake at night replaying conversations that didn't sit right, to the women who gave their name, their time, their love, and got betrayal in return. I submitted the letter to the local paper's Community Voices column. Carla said I could. There were no legal restrictions on telling the truth. It read, My name is Elaine Morgan. I am 66 years old, and I was stolen from, not by a stranger, but by family. My niece and her husband used my name for loans, credit cards, and more. They thought I wouldn't notice, but I did, and I did something about it. If you are reading this and know that someone is taking from you money, energy, dignity, know that you have the right to stop it. Quiet doesn't mean weak. Age doesn't mean unaware. And love does not require surrender. You don't have to scream. You just have to act. The paper published it the following Sunday. I found it folded neatly on the library bulletin board, the corner pinned down with a pink thumbtack. I stood there staring at my own words until a woman beside me whispered, That was you. I turned, and she reached out to squeeze my hand. My daughter's doing the same to me, she said. You just gave me permission to fight back. That afternoon, I received a handwritten letter, yes, handwritten, from a woman in the next town, a widow like me. She said her nephew convinced her to co-sign a car, then vanished. She never told anyone, until she read my story. It spread. The shame didn't belong to me anymore. It never had. I sold the house not long after, not because I had to, because I wanted to. Too many echoes lived in those walls, too many memories that had been tainted, like old photo frames left out in the rain. I bought a small cottage near a lake an hour north. Simple. Sunlight in every window, birds that came back each morning like clockwork. The first night there, I slept soundly, not because the bed was softer, but because I was no longer carrying their debt, in my name or on my spirit. I started teaching again, just 2 afternoons a week at the local library, reading Hour for Children. Some of them sit on the floor, hands on their chins, staring up at me like I'm magic. It reminds me of when Melissa was small, before she learned to lie with a smile. I've made friends here, real ones. Women who wear wide-brimmed hats and trade tomato plants on Fridays. They don't ask questions I don't want to answer. And then there's Thomas, my neighbor 2 cabins down. Retired Navy vet with a quiet voice and a walking stick he carved himself. He brings me fresh herbs from his garden and tells stories about birds I've never heard of. He never asks what happened with my family. He just says, You look lighter these days. And I do. I haven't spoken to Melissa or Greg since the preliminary hearing. They pled guilty to one of the lesser charges to avoid jail time, but still owed thousands in restitution. They're not allowed to contact me. Sometimes I wonder if they still talk about me, if they tell people I turned on them. But that's the thing about people who use others. They never understand what happens when the person they thought was weak decides to stop giving. And I've stopped. Not out of bitterness, out of peace. Because peace isn't just the absence of noise, it's the presence of self. This morning, I stood on my porch with a cup of tea in hand, the lake still as glass. A bluebird landed on the railing, same one that visits every morning. I named her Ruth. I looked out at my little garden, basil, marigolds, lavender, and thought, this is mine, all of it. My name, my life, my peace. On the wall inside hangs a small wooden plaque. I had it engraved last month. It says, "They laughed, thinking I wouldn't notice. I noticed, and I chose myself." That's the story now, not theirs, mine. And I didn't need revenge to win. I just needed the truth, and the courage to walk away while they were still laughing. Now, I'm the one smiling.